Bottoms, released in 2023 and directed by Emma Seligman, is a teenage queer satirical comedy centered on two unpopular gay best friends, Josie, played by Aya Debris, and PJ, played by Rachel Sonnet, takes place in an incredibly hyper-masculine and over-exaggerated universe. In an attempt to hook up with cheerleaders, Josie and PJ begin a fight club under the guise of building female solidarity after a rival football team starts attacking their town. However, as the film goes on, the fight club begins to culminate into something more, and the girls begin to connect with each other, until the truth is revealed and the club falls apart. Ultimately, the conflict is resolved when the girls come together to defend their town from their rival football team, who plan to murder their star quarterback. Bottoms, although it's a unique take on comedy and sapphic stories, is actually incredibly cliché in its characters and tropes from an analytical perspective. This movie is essentially a play on straight 90s to 2000 movies, such as Superbad and Mean Girls. However, instead of the straight loser nerdy guy getting with a popular cheerleader, it's a straight loser nerdy lesbian. What I found was especially interesting about this dynamic was how each movie is perceived. The 90s and 2000s movies were not exactly known to be inherently feminist, and at many times portrayed harmful depictions of women that excessively sexualized and marginalized them, as well as giving female characters little to no character depth and development. Bottoms does the same thing, with the love interest Isabel depicted with the only purpose of being the love interest. However, it is still widely acclaimed to be a feminist film, so why is that? The answer is the absence of men. In most straight 90s to 2000s films, the suppression and disempowerment of women is done to support the empowerment of the protagonist, the man. The man gets all the character development, all the progression, and all the power, while female characters are only created to further development of him. Although Bottoms follows the same trajectory, with the love interest, what differentiates Bottoms from all these other films is that Josie is not a man. So instead of these harmful depictions of women being used to support the empowerment of men, it is being used to support the power of lesbians. This is very reflective of Wittig's ideas, as she makes the claim that the only way to escape the oppression of women is through the act of lesbianism as a social behavior. By engaging in lesbianism, women reject the binary categories of man and woman, therefore escaping the oppression that is associated with the label of woman. The emphasis on how different these films are perceived despite their parallel characteristics demonstrates how Wittig's perspective on lesbianism is relevant in depictions of feminism in media. It allows us to explore what would actually happen if a society of women rejected men, which is essentially what occurs in Bottoms. Since all male characters in the film are in essence unintelligent, hypermasculine bimbos who only serve as antagonists of the story, the story is able to focus on the complexity and progression of female protagonists, Josie and PJ. In essence, the rejection of men throughout the film causes the absence of men, which permits the exploration of characters without creating a hierarchy between the binary categories of man and woman. Not only is the storyline purposeful, but Bottoms is also incredibly intentional with its directorial and production choices as well. One key aspect of the film is its absurdist comedy and explicit humor, as well as its violence. The jokes made throughout the film are often very blunt, sexual, and ridiculous. They feel exaggerated and satirical, however, this is done in an intentional and self-aware way. It makes the patriarchal aspects of our own society much more obvious, such as the scene where, in an attempt to increase female solidarity within the fight club, PJ bluntly asks who has been raped in the room.
Okay, so who's been raped? Just, raise your hand. Gray area stuff counts too.
This humor is meant to induce discomfort into the audience, as it plays on the internalization and suppression of sensitive topics. In Contrapoints' Twilight video, she highlights the concept of disavowal, which is the rejection of responsibility or association of a topic. Contrapoints links disavowal directly to sex and fantasy for women, theorizing that women must overcome the social connotation associated with sex, often resulting in the disavowal of sex in order to fit societal expectations, which manifests into sexual fantasies. When this concept is applied to Bottoms, the humor in Bottoms almost acknowledges the disavowal of sensitive topics and actively works against it. The callousness of the scene is, although satirical, plays on the controversial and taboo topics through its shamelessness and insensitivity, intentionally creating an uncomfortable feeling in the audience. The violence in Bottoms works in a similar way. At the end of the movie, the Fight Club comes together and brutally murders the entire rival football team in order to save the day and protect their town, all of which is depicted in a ridiculous and over-the-top fight scene. Many critics and audience members displayed surprise at this ending, claiming that they knew the movie was absurd, but that the final ending seemed excessive, given that at the end of the movie, all the girls are covered in blood, having just slaughtered an entire football team. However, this final violent scene to end off the movie can be interpreted as not only absurd, but also a final culmination of the oppressive, ultra-patriarchal, exaggerated society the film takes place in. In a world where women were more often than not shaped to be as feminine as possible for the benefit of men.
Oh my god, I always wanted one of these. But my mom says they hide your figure and make you look ugly.
The inherent homosexual nature as well as violent nature of women was disavowal in order to uphold the patriarchal status quo. Therefore, this over-the-top violent slaughter is the ultimate FU to this concept of disavowal in this universe, ultimately rejecting this oppression through its ridiculousness and outlandishness. A final interesting aspect about Bottoms is how its view on homosexual and heterosexual behavior diverges from Wittig's perspective. Wittig believes sexuality is a social behavior and is achieved through physical actions. In contrast, Contrapoints maintains the firm belief that sexuality is something innate and biological, and one cannot simply change their sexuality because they want to.
Most people do not experience their sexual orientation as the result of a rational process of consciously deciding the correct course of action after considering the advice of trusted colleagues. Many heterosexual women totally agree with Sheila Jeffries that #men are trash, and they love to say, I wish I were a lesbian, and talk about how gross and cringe heterosexuality is, and yet they continue being straight because libido does not follow reason.
Bottoms makes it clear that they believe sexuality is a biological factor, and that one cannot simply become homosexual even if their environment actively supports it.
Oh wait, I'm gay. Okay, yeah, I'm not. I just like gay porn.
However, contrary to Wittig, Bottoms portrays that being straight does not hinder one's ability to reject men as a class and still maintain being feminist. For example, although many of the girls in the Fight Club are still straight or assumed to be by the end of the movie, they are still included in the final fight scene where they violently slaughter the entire football team, which is symbolic of rejecting men as a class, as well as the patriarchal status quo. This is incredibly contrasting to Wittig, who claims that lesbianism is a social behavior and is the only way to escape oppression through the rejection of binary categories, while Bottoms seems to claim that the rejection of men can still occur without the need for lesbianism, more closely aligning with the ideas of Contrapoints and her criticism of the political scholar Sheila Jeffries. The ideas and concepts of both Contrapoints and Wittig allow the exploration of the intentional plot and production choices of Bottoms, as well as the exploration of how the social hierarchy between man and woman exists in our world, and how different what-ifs that occur in Bottoms can impact and alter the status quo of our own society.
Man, I knew women were good. I've been saying that shit the whole time, man.